Okay, we'll start with this. Well, I saw some reports floating around regarding the recent viewership numbers for Shawn Porter's fight this past weekend against Yordenis Ugas, and the numbers, they were good numbers. The reports put the number for Shawn Porter versus Yordenis Ugas at an average of about 1,628,000 viewers. That's a lot more viewers than Shawn Porter got for his last fight. His last fight didn't even break 1 million, okay? But his last fight just so happened to be against a more popular guy than Yordenis Ugas. We're talking about the Danny Garcia fight. Now, before we really get into it, let me preface everything I'm saying with this. These reported numbers, these reports, they don't seem to cite Nielsen Media and TV research as the source for their numbers. So you gotta take it with a grain of salt. But I'll go as far as saying that I can believe that Shawn Porter did these numbers, and here's why. The fight with Shawn Porter and Yordenis Ugas was aired on Fox. Fox, which is a much bigger network than Showtime and reaches that many more homes. You gotta understand that Caleb Plant's fight with Jose Uzcategui, two guys that are not really well known to the casual audience, two guys that are nowhere near as popular as some other fighters. They did better viewership numbers fighting each other than a more polarized, more popular fighter than either of them. Talking about Gervonta Davis. Gervonta Davis is more well known in the casual circles of boxing. Not just the hardcores, but the casuals too. This is a more well known, more talked about guy than either of them, and yet their fight drew more viewers than his. So I can totally believe that Shawn Porter did these numbers because their fight, much like his fight, was aired on Fox. Fox is a bigger network and you can do much better numbers there than you can on Showtime. Showtime just doesn't reach that many homes, not as many as Fox. So I can believe what these reports are stating. And because I can believe that, it allows me to allude to my point. We all know that the PBC is dividing their content between Showtime and Fox. But we're noticing a very big disparity when they have a card on Showtime and when they have a card on Fox. We're noticing that they're not getting their fighters that much more exposure. They're not getting access to that many more homes by having their boys fighting on Showtime. So the question then becomes,
should they even fight there?
Does PBC, rather, should the PBC even continue to have their fighters fighting on Showtime if they have a choice? If they can have those same fighters fighting on Fox where they'll get much more exposure, shouldn't they do that? I'll say that if the goal is getting more exposure for the fighter, exposing that fighter to a more mainstream audience so that they can become more of a marquee fighter, be able to put more asses in more seats by becoming more well known to the American public, if that is the goal, then having that fighter fighting on Showtime is hampering that goal. It's stifling that process because they're not reaching that many more homes. The only benefit that I can kind of see in PBC dividing their content between two networks this way is they're getting a budget from those two networks. That's more money for your content. That's more money for your content and more fight dates for your fighters. But it's a bit of a redundancy because while you may be getting more money for your content and you may be getting more fight dates for your fighters, when the fighters are fighting, people aren't watching, not when it's on Showtime. So it is a bit of a redundancy. It's a bit of a circle jerk. And given the topographical environment of boxing today, it really does behoove the PBC to get their guys as much exposure as they can because they've got some stiff competition and heavy moves are being made. So when I look at this, I think to myself,
it's not working.
Does it really benefit the PBC and the fighters that fight under that banner, whatever kind of banner it is, does it benefit them to have the content split up this way? Because whoever's fighting on Showtime, they're really not getting seen. We saw the numbers for Gervonta Davis fight. We saw the numbers for the Lara versus Castaño fight. You know, these fights, they're not anywhere near 1 million. But I do think that if it were on Fox, they would have got better numbers, thus getting more exposure. Now, back in August of last year, it was announced that the PBC was extending their already existing relationship with Showtime for the next 3 years. But given these viewership numbers, it's hard to imagine that that partnership is going to persist as these viewership numbers dip lower and lower. And the people over there at the PBC, they've got to be noticing the difference. I mean, they've got to be noticing the discrepancy in the viewership whenever they have a card on Fox and the viewership whenever they have a card on Showtime. So it's just hard to imagine that these kinds of TV ratings, when it comes to Showtime and PBC's cards, it's hard to imagine that this is gonna go on for what, another 2.5 years or something like that? Because we're already seeing which network is the obvious choice to get these fighters more exposure. Take Deontay Wilder, for example. Deontay Wilder, who's been fighting on Showtime for as long as I can remember. Very recently, in regards to his fight, his potential fight with Dominic Breazeale, he was quoted as saying that that fight would be better suited being on Fox. That he'd definitely rather fight Dominic Breazeale on Fox than a Showtime pay-per-view. That he would like to get the viewership numbers up, you know? It's a situation that I think for the PBC requires immediate attention and some kind of resolution. I mean, on one end, you know which network is going to get your fighters more exposure. Which network is the way to go if you're trying to get these guys known, if you're trying to get these guys in front of the mainstream. It's pretty obvious that that's Fox. But on the other end of the spectrum, you guys did make a commitment to Showtime last year, and that commitment is nowhere near done. So, what exactly is the PBC going to do in this situation? It's very peculiar, but I'll tell you, like I said, I'm not the least bit surprised that Sean Porter did those numbers on Fox. I'm not the least bit surprised.
Fox a bigger network.
I'm just wondering how this situation is going to resolve itself. Because when you got a fighter like Deontay Wilder, who normally fights on Showtime, saying things like he'd rather fight on Fox, it's pretty clear that the situation requires some resolution. And yet another anomalous occurrence that's occurring over there in PBC land in regards to PBC's fans. You may be noticing that these guys are starting to change their tune in regards to DAZN. In regards to DAZN as a platform and what future possibilities they hope to see. Get a whiff of this. I Know Boxing, that's his name. He had this to say. He said, "You all will poop your pants if Al Haymon takes PBC to DAZN."
Why would that be?
That's really not how you spell it, but whatever. Like Oscar and Hearn took Golden Boy and Matchroom over there. I can hear y'all crying now. Please, DAZN, don't bring on the PBC brand. I've been noticing this change of tune from
PBC fans,
the guys and gals over there in PBC land, and it seems like they're changing their opinion about the app, even though they were the main ones that were shitting on it. You understand? From that app's inception, from that streaming app's inception, when they landed here in September of last year, these were the same people that were shitting all over this thing. Now all of a sudden, they're holding out hope that fighters like Deontay Wilder and the PBC brand overall can forge some kind of a deal with them. But these are the same people that said the app would fail, that no prominent American fighters would sign to DAZN or to Matchroom, you know, because of their association with Eddie Hearn. They were doing and saying everything they possibly could to throw shade at that app so that they could turn around a couple of months later in hopes that Al Haymon can strike some kind of deal. Well, let's address that.
Hypocrite.
For starters, if you're holding out hope that Al Haymon can strike some kind of a deal with DAZN that would see his content also featured on there, there's a huge problem. And it's that he just struck a deal with Fox. It's a 5-year deal. To top that all off, he got an extension on his already existing relationship with Showtime. So between the two networks that you're already splitting up your content with, what exactly does that even leave for you to pitch DAZN in terms of content, in terms of a content deal? Who would you even have fighting on there? You already promised the people over there at Fox that your more prominent and popular fighters are going to be fighting on Fox. In which case, you got your B-team guys fighting over there on Showtime. That really doesn't leave anybody for you to have fighting anywhere else. To top it all off, if those fighters that your content on Fox is made up of, or your content on Showtime is made up of, if those fighters individually, independently, with their teams decide to reach some kind of a deal over there at DAZN that they want to fight on that platform, well, it won't be under the PBC banner, and that's very much what we're seeing. That if Deontay Wilder, for example, decides to cross that street and take that deal to fight on DAZN for a couple of fights, his duration there won't be under the PBC banner, and the same applies to Jamal Charlo, Gervonta Davis, and anybody else that DAZN and Matchroom USA is interested in. That if a fighter does cross that street, PBC's been cut out of the deal because PBC's commitments are with Fox and Showtime. And their fighters not having exclusivity contracts with those networks and them not actually being a promotional company,
not in the traditional sense,
there wouldn't be anything to bind the fighter from crossing the street. There would be no legal constraints to prevent that fighter from crossing that street. So if DAZN can offer a fighter a situation that is more financially lucrative than whatever he's got going on at the PBC, there's very little that can be done to stop that fighter from crossing that street. Now, if the PBC were a promotional company in the traditional sense, which would probably leave them in violation of the Ali Act, but that's another story, but hypothetically speaking, if they were a promotional company in the traditional sense, then that would prohibit fighters from crossing that street to fighting on some other platform, because your promoter has an existing content deal with a network, and you are bound by that content deal. But the fact that, well, you know, PBC's not a promotional company, not in the traditional sense, that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. That a fighter like Adam Kalnaki, for example, who's been fighting on PBC cards, it's perfectly legal for him to entertain offers from other outfits that are promotional companies in a traditional sense. It's perfectly legal for him to entertain those offers and enter those situations because technically
he's a network free agent.
He doesn't really have a network deal. He fights on PBC cards, and it's PBC as a banner that has the network deal, but not the individual fighter. So the individual fighter can float where he wants to float to make however much money he wants to make. And if you got somebody out there that's offering you more money, 9 times out of 10, you're probably gonna take it. So long as it's legal for you to do so. So long as there are no legal ramifications in you doing so. Now, I'll speculate. I will hypothesize. Let's say that what I know boxing were to somehow get worked out. Somehow, Al Haymon devises a way to pitch PBC content that he's already pitched to Fox, that he's already pitched to Showtime, and they've already bought. Let's just entertain that maybe Al Haymon were to try to pitch content to the DAZN. That way he could have his fighters fighting on there as well. If by some chance he could work out a situation like that, what makes you think that we'd be mad about that, when that would be effectively doing what we've been asking him to do? Work with other people, you fucking idiot! I mean, that's the biggest gripe that people have with Al Haymon, with the PBC, that they don't want to work with anybody. And because they don't want to work with anybody, a lot of fights don't get made. That's people's biggest problem with the PBC. That's the main criticism that people have for them. So if they were to try to work with DAZN, a guy like me wouldn't be mad about that, because more fights are made possible as a result of that. These guys traverse the YouTube boxing community's landscape, watching videos where people address their gripes with Al Haymon, with the PBC. They watch video upon video upon video, and it's almost like they didn't hear anything that anyone says in these videos. That people's biggest problem with the PBC is their unwillingness to work with other outfits, to work with other promoters and people that are out there to see the big fights get made. This is everyone's biggest problem with the PBC. 9 times out of 10, if you're hearing somebody saying something derogatory about Al Haymon and the PBC, that's what it is. So if he were to try to bridge a gap, extend an olive branch, see his content aired on DAZN, thereby making fights between his stable of fighters and other people's stable of fighters, if he were to try to do that, that wouldn't be something that I'm mad about. Why the fuck would I be mad about it when I've been waiting for him to start working with other people, you dumb motherfucker? I don't know why so many of PBC's biggest fans, biggest supporters, Haymonites, as I like to call them, because they swear by Al Haymon like the guy's Jesus Christ, a Kaiser Soze. I don't know why it's so prevalent among this subset of boxing fans that they act like petulant fucking children. They argue like petulant fucking children. That while this guy was scrambling for some kind of a rebuttal because he heard something that he didn't like, but he couldn't combat the truth with the truth, while he was scrambling for something to say, just anything, it completely went over his head that the proposition that you're making would essentially give us what we want. That's what we've been wanting, for Al Haymon and his PBC fighters to work with other people. to be willing to reach situations with other platforms that would make certain of the big fights in boxing, certain of those fights possible. You don't have to acquiesce to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that's out there. But for the big fights, it would require you to work with other people. And that's what we've been wanting. And essentially, that's what you're proposing, you fucking idiot. But we've been proposing that long before you have. Whereas you, this DAZN app, and you know, since its inception, the Haymonites, the PBC fans, they've been the ones that been shitting on it. They've been the ones that have been throwing shade that way, saying that it would never work, it would fail, they're not going to be able to sign any big U.S. fighters, and yet they managed to snag the biggest draw, the biggest pay-per-view draw, I should say, in the United States. And now, who's knocking at their door, looking to reach a deal? The guy who's nuts you guys have been swinging off of. The same guy that said something very similar to what you guys are saying. Wasn't it Deontay Wilder himself who not but a few months ago referred to the DAZN app as the D's Nuts app? Yet here today, you're in front of those nuts, looking for a payday, swinging off them nuts. Ain't that the truth? That was him a couple of months ago, calling it D's Nuts. And his fans mirrored that sentiment, repeated everything he said like the followers and sheep that they are. Wasn't it Deontay Wilder himself who also said that in regards to DAZN, that shit is trash, and no top U.S. fighter will sign to that shit? Wasn't that him that said that? Yet here he is trying to strike a deal with them today. And didn't his own fans mirror that sentiment, that no top U.S. fighter will sign on to DAZN, and yet now we're seeing a push from his fans for U.S. fighters to sign on to DAZN, to get in on that deal, so that they can get bigger paydays than they've ever gotten? Is it a coincidence that the bipolar behaviors of Deontay Wilder are also mirrored by his fans and the PBC fans overall? That these guys act like they got like a fucking psychological disorder or something? That the same petulant and childish behavior we see exhibited from a fighter like Deontay Wilder, for example, is mirrored by his moron fans, who I've no doubt rode the shortest bus to school and probably still do. I'm not completely sure why these guys are so insistent on trying to participate in what are adult conversations regarding the sport of boxing. I don't know why they try to talk so much with the adults in the room, but you belong at the fucking kiddie table with the rest of the LDBC/PBC/Haymonite sycophants. That's where you belong. You don't belong on a channel like this one, being as childish and petulant as you are.
Barbershop conversation, guys. Feel free to hit the subscribe button. I'm not watching that DAZN shit. I'm watching UFC. And I told you guys, I never ever was opposed to DAZN.